Afternoon, everybody. Happy New Year to you and welcome to this session with the family of UK Agritech centres. I'm Lindsay Chapman, representing the joint centres today, and we're really delighted to be supporting this year's Oxford Farming Conference. The UK Agritech centres were established in 2016 through support through the UK's innovation agency, Innovate UK. Whilst independent businesses, each with our own specific remits, we work collaboratively and share a joint ambition to improve the productivity, profitability and resilience across the whole of the agri-food sector. We work with government departments across the UK, some fantastic researchers at leading universities and institutions, and of course a large number of great food and farming businesses. Many of you will be joining today, so I'm really sorry we're not able to meet in person. However, for those that don't know us, please get in touch. Details can be found from our joint centres websites on the bottom there, agritechcentres.com, or our individual centres sites. Next slide, please, Jane. So this session is designed to provide a snapshot of some of the centre's work supporting agri-tech innovation. We designed it with a face-to-face format in mind, so we've had to tweak it slightly from that published to work in this virtual format. So I'll just run through the plan that we've got for you. So to start with, Harry from CHAP will provide some highlights and preview for their upcoming net zero report for arable and horticulture. Phil from CL will follow with some insight from our latest net zero and livestock work. Trish from Agri-EP will outline the work driving forward agri-tech innovation, and she'll provide a case study on beef. And then Rebecca from Agrimetrics will describe the acceleration of data-driven innovation, so a packed programme. Phil will lead a group discussion with all the presenters then in response to your questions and comments, so do please put those in the chat function. So apologies in advance for the repetition of next slide, please, but we decided that it was sort of simpler and more straightforward to operate a single slide deck. And thanks, Jane, for operating those for us. Hope you enjoy the session. We look forward to collaborating with you in 2022, and I'd like to hand over to Harry now. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, Lindsay. So I'm Harry Langford, Innovation Network Lead at CHAP. And at CHAP, we bring together scientists, farmers, advisors, and pioneers to advance sustainable crop productivity through the development and adoption of applied agri-technologies. But this afternoon, rather than doing an introduction to CHAP, I'm going to focus my time on overviewing a collaborative effort that CHAP are involved in to independently review and define the baseline benchmarks for the greenhouse gas emissions associated with UK arable and horticultural crops. Next slide, please. So we know that agriculture is responsible for 10% of the UK greenhouse gas emissions, and that the government have signed up to a legal agreement to reduce emissions to net zero by 2050. Alongside this, the NFU have set an even bolder 2040 ambition. And so to meet this net zero challenge and create an agricultural economy resilient to the effects of climate change, we need to fully understand the emissions profiles for different crops and how they vary depending on environmental factors and management decisions. This will allow farmers to adopt best practice, make changes to their farm management, and benefit both their sustainable productivity and the environment. Next slide, please. So in light of this, we have collaborated with the NFU and AHDB and worked with ADAS to produce a report on the global warming potential of UK arable and horticultural crops, which we hope can be used as a baseline for the sector and to drive positive change, both in practice and innovation. Next slide, please. So we've tried to include as broad a range of common crops as possible where data exists on those crops. So obviously, the more niche crops don't currently have reported literature values from them, but we've still managed to create figures for the majority of common crops produced in the UK. And as you can imagine, not all data in this space is equally robust. So just a note really to say that when we've reviewed and synthesized the data, we've preferentially sought data that utilizes certified PAS 2050 or full life cycle analysis methodologies. And this really essentially allows us to better aggregate comparative data and establish more robust baselines. Next slide, please. So it was difficult to summarize all of the emissions profiles for all of the crops in one slide, but I did try. So the left-hand figure shows the broad ranges of emissions intensities that exist within UK crop production, broadly broken down by sector and with some key exemplar crops baseline emissions highlighted. So as you might expect, not all crops are equal because they have different growth cycles, inputs and storage, for example. So some, like apples, towards the bottom there on the right, have they strongly benefit from being a perennial tree fruit, whilst others, like lettuce, suffer from having a shorter annual growth cycle and being grown primarily in lighter and more organic rich soils. So the center figure zooms in a little on some typical arable crops with the baselines shown in blue. One thing to note, unlike OSR and potatoes, the baselines for wheat and barley are more dependent on such things as production season and whether the crop is for feed or milling. So we've defined a range of different emissions intensities for crops like that. So wheat, for example, shows a typical emissions intensity of 340 kilograms of CO2 equivalent per ton for winter feed wheat versus, for example, 420 kilograms for winter milling wheat. And that difference is largely due to the difference in inputs between the two crops. So the right-hand figure then takes that conventionally produced feed wheat as an example to illustrate the typical emissions breakdown. And you'll see that for feed wheat, nitrogen fertilizer contributes around 2/3 of the total emissions actually via its manufacture and also from both direct and indirect emissions from its application. Next slide, please. So following on with the feed wheat example, the report also overviews the opportunities for emissions mitigation, focusing here, unsurprisingly, on mitigating the nitrogen fertilizer emissions. So there are a number of ways to achieve this, some of which are current best available techniques or best practice, like precision application, and some of which are developing technologies that are expanding their market share or even approaching market launch. And as we are an Agritech centre, I've focused on exemplifying the more innovative technologies like the endophyte seed treatments, such as Tyros from Union Bioscience, or the disruptive R-leaf photocatalysis technology from Crop Intellect, which won Tesco's Agri-Tea Jam last month or the month before perhaps. And so really just to say that innovation in this space is focusing on how to increase biological nitrogen supply or how to engineer new sources of nitrogen for direct supply, which is really exciting to see. Next slide, please. And so I want to end by saying that the Net Zero Cropping Review will be available in spring 2022. And we at CHAP are always looking to support the development and adoption of new agritech innovations that allow farmers to improve their sustainable productivity. And as we heard from COP26, climate risk disclosures, or basically a carbon footprint and management plan, will be mandatory for all UK companies by 2025. And we really hope that this report will provide a springboard for achieving this by reviewing current evidence and better defining industry baselines. So next slide, please. Thank you for listening. My email address is on this last slide, and I'll now pass you on to Phil Bicknell from CL, who is speaking now.
Much appreciated. If you go next slide, please, Jane. And look, we're picking up a theme around net zero here, and agriculture has an important role in delivering our net zero commitments, and livestock agriculture is, of course, expected to play its part. Now, CL's 2020 report, looking at net zero carbon and UK livestock, well, that outlined the science, it highlighted some of the emission hotspots and provided some benchmarks against which we can assess progress as we hopefully reduce the carbon footprint of our livestock farms and of their food products. Next few minutes, I want to share some key headlines from some follow-up work. Now, look, as a farmer, making sense of the carbon challenge is difficult. And at the end of the day, we operate some complex businesses in some pretty complex supply chains where interdependencies are not necessarily understood. So we're focusing on that. We're looking at the options for mitigation actions that can be implemented on farm. And we want to use this in more detailed modelling to assess the impact of individual mitigation measures and how they can be combined at a farm level. If you move on to next slide, please, Jane. Now, the sector-by-sector approach looks at different mitigation strategies, different actions that farmers can take, and it assesses those potential actions against a range of criteria. And we've identified those potential actions and we've grouped them by theme. So it looks at feed-related and forage-related aspects, for instance, looks at animal-related measures, and those based around the management and use of manures and fertilizers. And including that, we do take a look at some of the emerging technology around rumen methane inhibitors, some of the things which might not necessarily be available now, but which are in the pipeline. And we assess all of those against the criteria and the factors that are on the right-hand side of the slide there. So what we end up with for each sector, and you'll see this on the next slide, is a range of actions that farmers can take, where we've assessed them against the key criteria. And what we've been conscious of in working with the scientists on this work is flagging the potential options for farmers. As an industry, I think we're perhaps used to sector level roadmaps or industry plans. But as we all know, the situation and context for every single farm can be very different. So therefore, developing an action plan at farm level, well, that's a much tougher proposition entirely. So we know a single template isn't going to work for individual farm businesses, but there are options that we can all consider. And our work presents these options, taking a high, medium, low approach, taking an assessment against the individual actions that we can take. Now, I think as anybody who's operating in the space knows, looking at net zero in agriculture is complex and unlocks some wider reaching issues. And I think just some of the words that we have in the next slide just kind of sums this up. The work that we're undertaking at CL is very much work in progress, but three things do jump out for me. The first is around the fit with productivity, and probably follows on from it, profitability as well. A lot of the actions that I can take on farm also have implications for farm efficiency. So whether it's the more effective use of forage or focusing on animal health, it's a win-win situation. And it's productivity improvements that when we looked at dairy numbers, we know there's been a 16% drop in total emissions from the UK dairy herd. And that has been achieved by productivity improvements. And it's much more nuanced than intensive versus extensive, but it's also a critical part of UK livestock producers being able to tell a positive story. One thing that has really kind of hit home from the work that we've got in the pipeline is that trees aren't the only solution. Although they tend to be the option that perhaps the media sees on quite a lot, we know that land use change is important, but sometimes it feels like trees are pushed as the single answer. And as a nation, I think we need to think carefully about land use as part of any discussions around net zero. We need to be conscious of the unintended consequences, particularly around offshoring our production and therefore its carbon impact. Third impact is around getting the credit. Now, changes that reduce my own carbon footprint at the farm level, we know they don't always flow through to reducing the national inventory. This feels like a bit of a major hurdle for me as a farmer to try and think through to make sure that I'm getting the credit and the difference that I'm making carries through to that national level. I think collectively, when we kind of put those different aspects together in this work that's in train, it makes it somewhat different. There's already some useful pointers from me when I come at this from a farming perspective, and the modelling work that we're going to put around this to be able to talk about it in terms of carbon impact per kilo of output, well, that's going to be even more informative in terms of steering what I can do and what I can change on farm. It takes it to another level. And it doesn't shy away from the complexities around the need for change. And it challenges some of the myths and misconceptions around agriculture and net zero. So in terms of our timeline, which is on the final slide, we have the full report, which is coming later in 2022. CL members have had a sneak preview. They had a bit of Christmas reading and homework, where we've been able to share some of the findings for all the livestock sectors. And we've got some sector surgeries that are coming up for our members where we'll probe into the guide in a bit more detail. And I think, as I said at the outset, net zero is a thread that probably pulls together a whole host of priority areas for CL. And we're always up for a conversation about how those issues can be addressed and how our CL network can help. So I think that's enough from me. I will hand over to Trish from Agri-Epi.
Thank you very much, Phil. So hi, nice to sort of meet you today. I'm Trish Toop, and I'm the CTO for the Agri-Epi Centre. And unlike the first two sort of presentations, Agri-Epi Centre, we don't actually just focus on one specific sector such as crops or livestock. We have an across-sector approach with a focus on precision ag tech development to enable the drive to more sustainable agricultural systems. Next slide, please, Jane. So what we've done is we've created an ecosystem for collaborative innovation, because the aim of our centre is to link the farming and agri challenges really to the ag tech solutions, and that could be in the crop sector, the livestock sector, wherever, across the entire agri-food chain really. And to do this, we've focused on quite a few different areas. Now, I've only got 5 minutes today, so I can't go through all of them in depth, but if you are interested, reach out via the chat and we'll I'm happy to have a sort of a one-to-one more in-depth conversation with anybody. So one of the things that we have as an Agri-Epi Centre is we have some innovation hubs to help companies sort of innovate in this area and link in with the technical expertise we have in the centre, but also to link with other tech providers and also with the farmers. So we're sort of really trying to sort of foster the knowledge exchange and that networking. We have over 200 members at the moment, everything from large supermarkets through to sort of 1 to 2 people, SMEs who are trying to get agri-tech solutions off the ground. But one of our really key areas is we actually have real farms that we can test and demo agri-tech solutions on, so that we can link the tech providers with the real farmers, so that they can find out what the problems are that need solving. Because quite often we'll have a tech provider come to us with I've got a really good piece of kit, and it's going to solve a problem. You go, what problem? Well, it's just going to solve a problem. So we help to find what that problem is. And we can do that. Can I have the next slide, please, Jane? By sort of using our ecosystem along this sort of ideation to commercialization chain. I always stumble over that word. And we can sort of link companies in along that phrase, depending on where they need to be. So if they're really early stage, we can get them in with one of our tech incubators and we can help them develop a product. We can work with them on simulation suites, and we can look at sort of ground truthing through our smart farms. So on our farm network, so we have the innovation farms across the UK, so we have 25 of those, and they're everywhere from up in Scotland right down to sort of in England, and basically we have them across different sectors. So if somebody comes to us with a piece of tech that is specific for livestock, we put that on a livestock farm, and we have 3 international farms, 1 in South America and 2 in China. What I'm going to do now is Jane's going to show you a little video, which is a case study of one of our beef farms and how that's been linked with appropriate tech. So if you can press play, Jane, that would be fab. Thank you.
The challenges with traditionally weighing cattle every fortnight is the fact that you need a lot of labour and the time aspect involved in weighing all these cattle. But I would say the biggest gain for the cattle themselves is obviously welfare. There's a lot of stress in handling cattle, so the more you avoid doing that, the better the cattle are, basically, as a result.
The Ritchie Beef Monitor is a stress-free way of weighing your cattle. It's a water trough where the animal comes onto the unit, it reads its tag on the tag reader, the tag and the weight are then taken into that box and sent up to the cloud, where the farmer can then access our online platform and he or she can look at the calculated data for the animal at the end of each day.
So the gain we're finding from this business is the fact that our cattle aren't getting the same stress levels, so we're finding the growth is more consistent and potentially it leads on to cattle getting fatter quicker off the farm.
The Satellite Farm Network is a network of 25 commercial farms that Agri-Epicenter works very directly with. These farms are used as test beds for the research and development of technologies.
So the longer we're testing these on farm allows us to put a better product out there on the marketplace.
So the way that it's impacted the beef sector in general is just that all sorts of other farmers are now able to access that technology and access a technology that will actually work.
So ultimately using this technology on farm is basically helping profitability, making it more efficient, but it's also helping the environment at the same time.
So that was just sort of a really short clip of how we've sort of helped farmers sort of get into tech, and also a tech developer. But if you'd like to know more, I can see there's some questions coming through the chat. We'll answer them at the end, but thank you very much for listening. And I'm going to hand over to Rebecca in Agrimetrics.
Lovely, thank you, Trish. Next slide, please, Jane. So hi, everybody. I'm Rebecca Geraghty from Agrimetrics, and I'm going to talk about the work that we do across the agri-food sector, and specifically about the agri-food data marketplace. So the data marketplace went live in 2019, and it does what it says on the tin, essentially. It brings together a whole host of different data owners with a lot of people that are looking, and data consumers are people that are looking for data. So data owners tell us, look, we need some help to make our data more discoverable, to make it more attractive. It might be that people are looking for help to actually control their data, or they want to limit some of the maintenance costs that they have with hosting and making data available. And it's about matching them with a whole host of data consumers who are looking for the right data. So businesses who are developing tools and services where they want to get the right data, pull that data into their workflow, and they just want to pay for the data that they need. But of course, it's not as simple as that. So next slide, please, Jane. There are a whole host of different challenges when it comes to sharing and collaborating with data. And all of our experience across the team at Agrimetrics is actually trying to find and make accessible the data that's across the sector. Often it's trapped in different data silos in organisations, and that's often due to history, because we've got different data of different historic backgrounds with different permissions and of different qualities. How we elevate and make that data available is a real challenge. As a sector, we also have challenges around low data interoperability. How do we make data linked together? Because that's where the true innovation and the insight comes from. And it won't be any surprise to anybody at the conference over the next 3 days that we also have a challenge around data skills in the agri-food sector. Next slide, please, Jane. So how do we help? What has been the purpose of Agrimetrics, and particularly around the data marketplace? So our first job is to help people find data. And I'll show you in a moment an example of the data catalogue at Agrimetrics, which is the fastest growing catalogue of agricultural data. We also help businesses specifically manage their data, and we can do that through developing private data exchanges. So this is where an organisation or a business can share their data in a private way with people, and they give permissions. But it also means that they don't necessarily need to maintain that infrastructure themselves. A big part of our work has also been around data enablement, and that is a whole host of different things that are ongoing. So that could be things like data governance, helping a business to catalogue the data that they've got and make it more discoverable, through to helping businesses with producing a new data tool or a data service as well. There's a whole range of different organisations and businesses that we've been working from, but also learning a lot from that as we've gone along. Next slide, please, Jane. I think this is a really interesting stat that we got from Microsoft, and in their really, they've got a lot of experience of data-driven projects, and in their experience, around 80% of data-driven project resource is actually spent sourcing and transforming data, and that's really the challenge that we're trying to help with in terms of the agri-food sector from an Agrimetrics perspective, to try and shorten that time, try and reduce the resource that's required in terms of sourcing and transforming data. Next slide, please, Jane. So I talked about the data catalogue. On the data marketplace, the main thing that we have available is our data catalogue. And we have at the moment around 60 different agricultural data sets. And we group them into 4 key areas: natural capital data, earth observation, which is analysis ready satellite data, weather, and field data. And that, of course, is a catalogue that is constantly changing. It's something that we have to keep focused on. We've got to keep growing. And we're always interested in people's feedback. Next slide, please, Jane. And we need that feedback to make sure that it's always innovating and it's always keeping up with with what the data sets that the market needs. So if you've got any feedback, that's really appreciated. And this is what that data catalogue actually looks like. So you can see there's the different tiles for the different data sets that we have available. You can drill down into the different tiles to find out, okay, a bit more about that data set. Where's it come from? How often is it updated? And actually, is there a charge associated with it, or is it one of the free data sets that we have? And as a user, you can filter by data set properties. And if you're brave enough, you can also add in data sets as well. And as I said, it's an area that we will continue to invest in because we have to keep up with what the market requires. Next slide, please, Jane. Another key part of the Agrimetrics data marketplace is something called Field Explorer. And we produced this application to really start to bring to life how important it is to link data. So what we've done here is for all the UK fields, we have pre-linked data from the data marketplace, so that for different field boundaries, you can then have a look at data in terms of weather data, soil data, topography, environmental data, things like leaf area index, to show actually what kind of innovations and insights can we start to get by starting to link different data sets in the agri-food sector, the agri-food sector space. And it's really, so again, you can have a good play around with that on our website. So final slide now, please, Jane. So I wanted to finish by really bringing to life an example of where we worked with a company. Much of our work actually has been with businesses in the agri-food sector and less directly with farmers and growers. But always our work is ultimately to benefit farmers and growers. And this is an example of a tool that we've developed with BASF called When to Go. And I thought it really brought to life the importance around data. And from BASF's perspective, they wanted to reduce the potential of chemical ingredients, metazoclor and quinmerac, entering waterways. And we wanted to build on the foundations of the voluntary initiative and give something to growers that was smarter to use. So our role was really to bring together data from DEFRA, from the Met Office, from the Environment Agency, to help farmers calculate the risk of leaching. And actually, the brief that we got from BASF was also to make it as easy to use as possible. And that involved making sure that we could pre-link and pre-populate as much of that data so that growers received field-specific forecasts in under a minute. The most time-consuming part of any project like this is really about how do we find and access and manipulate the data. And rather than going to 5 or 6 different organisations and streaming their data, actually in this example, and what we do for other businesses is bring all that data together into one place and make that as quick and easy as possible. So I've flown through some examples there about what we do with the data marketplace. If you've got a data project that you're starting to think about, or you have any feedback on the data catalogue, we'd love to hear more about it after today. Thank you, and back over to Phil.
Thank you, Rebecca, and thanks to Harry and Trish as well. We've had a few questions come in via the chat, so we'll pick those up and keep the questions coming in. Rebecca, there's a question that's come in from Phil Stocker, and it kind of ties in with the world of metrics. And Phil asked about how far are we away from having one agreed set of metrics for carbon footprinting. And Phil's coming at it from a livestock perspective, but Harry, whether you want to give a view after we've heard from Rebecca just around the consistency or the challenges about getting one set of measures and metrics for the cereal sector, because presumably that's something you've had to contend with in terms of the work that you've been doing recently. So Rebecca, to you first.
I think it's a good point, Phil. I think there's still a way to go in terms of getting more consistency around metrics. I think I think it's a work in progress, definitely. And I think the more that we've seen today from colleagues from CHAP and the work that you've done at CL, Phil and Lindsay, that's great, because actually we're starting to drill down into the different things that we see from different tools. And certainly I know, I use one of the carbon tools on the farm here, but I know that that's different to, some of the other tools. I don't have any more information than that at the moment in terms of the metrics. I don't know whether, Harry, you want to comment on it from a cereals perspective.
Yeah, I mean, just to say, yes, it has been challenging, obviously, when you're looking to review and aggregate all of the literature. It's a fast-paced environment, and things are changing. So, the emissions factors that people have used, 10 years ago, have been replaced by more up-to-date emissions factors, and that really affects the values that people will come out with. And yes, just to nod to the chat, the emissions factors, the current IPCC emissions factors are the ones that we're now being used, but then you have to sort of try and retrofit those, which is a bit challenging. And I think it's what I agree, with Phil Stocker in the chat. I think we do need to be mindful that there are two ways to consider the carbon footprint, and emissions intensity, which is the way we've chosen, is this standard methodology. It does allow for comparison between crops more effectively, and it's therefore is on a kilogram or ton of product basis. But actually, it's just as valuable to look at the absolute values on a farm or land area basis, and that is what is going to need to be sort of done by each farm business by 2025 in order to satisfy some of the outcomes from COP26. So I think, yes, it's challenging, it's a moving feat, but we're making progress, and we're doing a good job of providing a robust baseline by looking at only the data that we really sort of trust, that has utilized these more robust methodologies, and so hopefully that will help people to really understand the starting point.
Yeah, Harry, I guess from my perspective, it feels like there's more science and evidence that is coming forward all the time, and it's a bit like on-farm budgeting, and when you make assumptions around cash flows and the financial projections. What do you do when things change? Well, you redo the budgets, and it's a similar approach. I think as we get new evidence, we need to incorporate that into the models. Trish, just a question that came in on the chat about Agri Epicenter and innovation hubs, and just say a little bit more about them. Are they physical places? How many do you have? What's the kind of infrastructure and network?
Yeah, that's fine. And I was when I was practicing my talk earlier, I had a lot more about innovation hubs and then realized I had no time to say anything about it. So I'm really glad that somebody asked. Actually, it wasn't a question I put in myself, I promise. So at the moment we have 3 physical innovation hubs. We have one up in Edinburgh on the SRUC campus, basically next door to one that Seal has up there as well. So basically that one is focused on livestock and food sort of production. So each of our innovation hubs has a slightly different focus. We have incubation spaces in each of the innovation hubs. So that one, we have some new sort of innovative novel food product companies in there and things like that, and we have some food testing labs, and we have a very not quite fully open aquaponics, or so not aquaponics, aquaculture facility there in conjunction with Roslyn. So that's the Edinburgh hub. We have a Midlands hub, which is where I'm based out of, and that's an engineering focused hub. So that we have actually engineering workshops and all of the bits and pieces that go along that. So if there's an SME that wants to develop a product, we've got the rapid prototypers, engineering stuff to help do that. And then we have a southern hub, which is in Cranfield, and that's our sort of crop focused one, where we sort of have some drones and also sort of imaging and plant imaging technology, which we work with CHAP on. So of 2 of the centres, they're sort of shared very closely with the other Agritech centres, and we're sharing sort of resource and facilities to make sure we get the best out of it for everybody else. So those are the hubs. So if anybody has any more questions, happy to sort of link up with me, and I can give them some more details on whatever they wish.
Thanks, Trish. And I'm conscious Lindsay's introduction, she talked about the Agritech family, and that's just kind of a nice example about actually where that interaction is just kind of standard. It's just part of what we do in terms of linking up what we do across the 4 centres. Harry, a question that was dropped in the chat was about the nature outcomes, particularly in relation to kind of COP26. So question there around what the CHAP network vision is on delivering outcomes and around productivity improvements regarding pesticides. And I think the example that is flagged there, it links into another comment that somebody got for us as CL around how we capture soil diversity and soil health and biodiversity. But if you want to say a little bit about actually how some of those, I suppose the biodiversity and nature outcomes are factored into some of the work you're thinking about. Yeah,
sure. And I mean, obviously, we strongly support an IPM approach, and all of the innovation work that we're doing really hinges around that. So, like all of the big ag chem companies, we're also supporting smaller innovators to create new biological or natural product pesticides. Currently, we've got projects looking at new sustainable alternatives to banned neonicotinoids for cabbage stem flea beetle, and also new natural products for Z. triticae, septoria. And we also work as part of our member network with AgriSound, who are an innovative sensor company that have developed a sensor really to monitor wild pollinators, for example. And then we also look, again, the other half of the sort of the IPM approach is, the precision management. We also do some work on precision spraying technology and both robotics and sort of tractor-based and ultrafine bubbles, applying those in spray technologies to basically apply as little product as possible, where and when it's needed, and most accurately. So we've got a lot of things going on in that space, which is really designed to minimize the level of pesticide inputs, support alternatives, and maximize ecosystem outcomes, positive ecosystem outcomes from these sort of technological interventions.
Thanks, Harry. And from a CL perspective, there's a question about not just looking at the carbon footprint reduction, but what about other aspects around soil health, etc. So in the specific piece of work that we've done, it doesn't capture that, but what it does, however, give is a springboard to be able to start to look at the knock-on impacts or associated impacts as a result of that. One of the things that the CL is involved with is a project called Grass Check GB. And that's about to go into its second iteration. That's all about measuring grass growth on farms, being able to forecast and model grass growth to support better grassland management. One of the things that is very much on the wish list around that second version is trying to pick up some of the potential improvements that we could have in soil health. But that's a bolt onto the core services, if you like, which is all around the resource use aspect. Jumping back to I think some of the changing science-based and emerging information. I think conscious Phil Stocker had his hand up and then put it down. So thanks for dropping the comment into the chat, Phil. And I think it's probably a point rather than a question, but I think it's a pretty good one in terms of actually the maybe IPCC don't review and update things in a particularly dynamic way, and as particularly, I guess, from a farming angle. The idea about how we measure carbon in hedgerows, given the diversity of hedgerows in terms of their size, breadth, width, etc. All of that seems pretty sensible. And Rebecca, I don't know whether there's anything that kind of comes from an agrimetrics perspective in terms of technology that's in the pipeline. How is there anything that remote sensors is a key thing? Drones are a growing area. Anything in the pipeline from your perspective?
I mean, it's a good question, Phil. We are certainly exploring with a range of different satellite and data providers, actually, what can technology provide in terms of things like measuring things like natural capital. And I think there's going to be, I think that area will move really quickly in terms of what can be provided in terms of measuring things like hedgerows, tree species, and there's probably products that are already coming to market. But as I said, I think it's going to move really quickly, is my sense. And it's a global market because everybody is looking at the same things. So I think it's one to watch this space.
Thank you. I'm conscious of timing. We're kind of scheduled to finish round about now. Just one final question from each of the panelists. So I'm conscious that anything around net zero again has been a theme for discussion for the last 45 minutes. But what's the one thing that farmers can do to make progress in this area? Conscious that it's really complex, there's a whole host of options we can take. So yeah, just after one thing that farmers can do. And Harry, if you want to go first, then Trish, then Rebecca.
Well, I mean, I guess synergizing with our report really is measure, and let us know if you're already beating the the baseline, the sector baselines that we're providing from the literature values. We want to know about it. We want to know about your success stories so that they can be inspiring for the rest of the sector.
Thanks, Harry. Trish.
Far more precisely. So on the back of measure, I was going to say measure, so I'm gutted Harry said it, but use precision. If you can use less of something, the emissions from it will be less. If you can feed less, your emissions will be less. If you can get the cows off the farm quicker, your emissions will be less. Far more precisely.
Becca?
I can only back up what I've heard already. It's about measuring. Wherever you are in the agri-food supply chain, we've got to prove our credentials, and we can only do that by measuring and providing the data. So yeah, I'd back up absolutely what Harry's message there.
Thank you. And look, I'd endorse those comments completely as well. Start somewhere and start measuring. Thank you, everybody, for the time and for the questions that have come in. Conscious there's a couple more we didn't get around to in the chat, but we'll try and respond to those. Thank you to our speakers. Just want to do one final plug for the Agritech centres and a joint conference that is scheduled for later in March. So watch out for the date. We're going to pin that down. But today you've just heard a little bit of a flavour about what we're doing across the Agritech centres. The joint conference that we'll have in a couple of months' time will delve a lot more into the work that we're all dealing with, the priorities we've got, and how we're helping the industry to address some of the innovation challenges that are heading our way. So I think thank you for your time. I think we got Jenna just wants to say a few words before we finish.
Yeah, thanks, Phil. I just want to say on behalf of the Oxford Farming Conference Council, a massive thank you to all 4 Agritech centres for this afternoon session. I feel very fortunate that I have a foot in both camps, in that I work for one of the Agritech centres, Crop Health Protection, but I am also one of the Oxford Farming Conference directors. So it's been fantastic to see the level of engagement and the number of questions that's come in for this session. I also want to say a big thank you to all 4 centres for their participation in the Oxford Farming Conference Scholars Programme. I've no doubt that today's session, coupled with the session that we did back in December, will be hugely inspiring to our scholars, and I'm sure we'll see this reflected in their group task later on this week. So I just want to say thank you again, and a reminder that the next Fringe session will start at 4 p.m. So thank you very much. See you then.